Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Mr. Makepeace is right about one thing. This is our one opportunity, our initial opportunity to talk to you and give you not only our theories of the case, but also what we anticipate you'll hear and what you won't hear. And if you took anything away from our voir dire process and talking to you and finding out from you as jurors, you took away one thing, and I hope that remains with you, is this chart. Even as I listen to Mr. Makepeace making his opening statement, he wants to negate significant aspects of this particular case. My theory of this case, one, is a failure when it's an absolute obligation for the government, the police, to bring you something that will allow you to make a decision that goes and follows along with that charter of beyond a reasonable doubt. Let's not forget what that is. So that, but also this is another aspect of this case is I call it the hometown team. As we know, this unfortunate event occurred and the investigation started in River Rouge. Small town. Those who we're in Wayne County, I imagine everyone knows that city. And in that town, what you have is a situation that the police don't ever give you the opportunity to make that determination. So let's talk about what happened. We have October, I believe it's October 21st, you'll hear testimony that Ms. Ramstrom comes to the city of River Rouge. You'll hear testimony, what I anticipate you'll hear testimony that she's there to drop off Mr. Medina's vehicle. What I'll add to you in there is that not only is her vehicle there, but Mr. Medina's vehicle. Do you know that in this trial, I don't anticipate that you're going to get any forensic. When we talk about forensic, we're talking about, I should just say evidence, rather than any evidence from those vehicles. No fibers, nothing inside. In fact, you will not get any cell phone information. And everybody has a cell phone today. There's something called, you'll hear questions about triangulation, about cell phone data. You'll hear about things that were in cell phones, but you will never have an opportunity to see it. So therefore, you have to rely upon witnesses whose clear credibility is being challenged here, is being attacked for various different reasons. So what you have is Ms. Ramstrom comes. She then, some of which is consistent with Mr. Makepeace says, she then meets Blanca Barrera. They also go shopping for a mattress for herself, and I believe some clothes and items from the store. They go to Sam's and Walmart. I believe that's what you'll hear. And at some point in time, you'll hear that they then go to a bar on Thursday night. You'll hear that this bar is a local bar block, maybe a block from this house on Catherine Street. They'll go to this bar, have burgers, and you see from that video, those individuals. You'll see Ms. Ramstrom, you'll see Natalie, you'll see Blanca, you'll see Joe Manriquez, and you'll see them interact with other people in the bar. One in particular was Bart. You'll hear his name, and you'll hear David. That ends, and you'll see another video from the bar from Saturday night going into Sunday morning. And you'll see in there on the Saturday night that it's a lot more crowded. You'll see at least one police officer walking around in his uniform, partying in there, much to what I indicate, the hometown team. And then you will see those individuals, Joe, Blanca, Natalie, and another friend in the bar. And ultimately, Natalie goes and talks to Bart and David and some other individuals who are at the bar. Joe and Blanca are seated at a table. That goes on. They ultimately leave. And in fact, Ms. Ramstrom, or Natalie, comes back. She comes back, and when she comes back, she's there for some time, and then she ultimately leaves with David Reese. They go, by the testimony you'll hear, they go to David Reese's house, which he shares with Bart, or maybe it's Bart's house that David's staying there. But he comes there, and they're there for some time. And I want you to take particular attention to this. At some point in time, you'll hear that David Reese makes a statement. He makes a statement, I believe, November 5th or November 6th. We will see the statement. And at some point in time, you'll hear that David Reese and Bart came together. At another point in time, you'll hear they came separately. Nonetheless, it's a statement. And you'll see, no, in fact, you will not see. The videotape that you were supposed to see of David Reese's statement doesn't exist.
Judge, may we approach?
Yes.
Now, just one second. Good morning again.
Good morning.
So, the video that we talked about of David Reese no longer exists. I'll phrase it like that. Now, and I believe that's what the evidence will show. Also in that evidence, what you will hear is you will hear questions about his writing, his actual writing of this statement. And as much, and it's very important to look at this detail, it is a point in time in which he writes in his statement, he says, at 3:53, sometime in the morning, and at is capitalized, which I believe that the evidence will show that at that time, he was still with Ms. Ramstrom. And what you'll also see, or what you'll also hear from the testimony, is that at a point in time, after writing that statement, you could tell it's a distinction in the handwriting. He has a conversation with the officer in charge, Mr. Arapakis. And after having that statement, he then writes again, at 3:53, he received or made a phone call. Different and significant. And along the way, I want you to look at those things. Now, you'll also hear that, and I think Mr. Makepeace glosses over this, he says that they had sex. When he's talking to him in November of 2020, he says he said he used his finger in having sexual relations. That's what he said. It wasn't until his DNA, I believe, was taken in August of 2022, and thereafter it was revealed that he clearly had sex. And I'm talking about penis to vagina or penis to anal area, because his DNA was there. What I believe the evidence will show is that he lied. What I believe the evidence will show is that he had reason to lie. I do believe that the evidence will show that he is the last person. And perhaps Barbara Morris, his roommate, are the last people from the evidence that you'll hear in this case to see her alive. Now, you'll also hear that Mr. Reese only describes one time that he was there. You'll also hear evidence that in this particular case, that leading up to the unfaithful day of the 27th of October, you'll hear evidence that Miss Barrera Blanca, her grandson, and at some point in time, Joe Manriquez, have gone in and out of this house from that Sunday, which I believe would be the 25th, the 26th, and the 27th. They have a key to this residence. They have access to this residence. They go in this residence and they describe nothing out of place. In fact, at some point in time they describe, you'll hear the evidence show that they will describe that on Monday, there was nothing there. On Tuesday, her clothes, her shoes were there, and other items that were there that weren't there on Monday. But yet they've been, and the evidence will show, they've been through this house. They come in and get the dog, come in and get dog food, and that's what the evidence will show. And as a result of that, there was never any investigation of them. What I mean by that is, there was never, the evidence will not show that their DNA was taken. The evidence will not show that they were ever fingerprinted. Other than those statements, there was no investigation into these individuals who had access to this particular place. What the evidence will show is that even prior to talking to David Reese and Bart Morris, the evidence will show that Mr. Arapakis made up his mind that at the outset that it was Mr. Medina who did this. We know that because he sought a warrant on November 4th. He had made up his mind at that point. And what he did not do, what will never have been done, because we'll get to those other things that are not going to be in there, is allow for the evidence to lead him to that belief other than making a supposition based upon what he had at that point. And what we have from, other than Mr. Medina, this being his place, what you will see, what you will hear is, yes, this is his place, but so many others have access. There's no information, and I don't suspect you'll hear any information, and I might be corrected wrong, but I don't recall that there'll be any evidence as to whether or not anybody made any determination that that second door was unlocked or unlocked. There are two access points at this particular location. So what the evidence will show is that when Mr. Makepeace talks about one fingerprint on a bag, a garbage bag that's in Mr. Medina's temporary residence, is on the outside of the bag. One fingerprint on a bag that's in your house. And he also says, yes, there's evidence of DNA with Ms. Ramstrom. And it wouldn't necessarily be, if they're in a relationship, as some of the testimony will say, that's not necessarily a significant issue. But what he didn't tell you is that there's limited support. The forensic expert will tell you there is limited support that evidence or that DNA belongs to Mr. Medina. When we talk about David Reese, you'll see substantial support. You'll see, I think the number might be 1 million times likely that it's Mr. Reese, where Mr. Medina 13 times. And you'll hear from the expert what that means and how significant that is. But more importantly, how significant you're getting the information in a way that you understand it and how it makes sense to us and how you interpret it. But you'll then hear other evidence that they go to the plant, and you'll see, or they'll put on evidence to say that Mr. Medina is at that plant and that he's there for 24 hours. But yet and still, you'll see there's a card reader at that plant. And that card reader, if you go in and out of that plant, and that card reader will tell you how many times that particular card was used to go in and out. But that's not even, that is not truth positive that he's there. Number one, you'll see in the witness that used to work at the Stellantis plant, I don't know if he still works there or not, he will testify that the end letter E means enter and the other letter X means exit. Then the evidence will show from his report it's an E and an E. So there is some dysfunction and some reason why you cannot trust this system and make a determination as to whether he's there or not. If you have X, where's the E? If you believe that is the absolute way that you tell whether he's in the plant or he left the plant, how do you have E and no E, X, E? It would have to be that way, and that's what the evidence will show. Now, the evidence will show, and we agree this by something called a stipulation, that Mr. Medina did go to Mexico. The evidence will show that he did return and voluntarily surrender. And that's what that aspect of the evidence will show. And we talked about that in voir dire. Now, you'll also hear, this is significant here, and you'll hear a lot of other things. I'm sure Mr. Makepeace has got a lot of other things to tell you, and I've got a lot more that I want you to peer into and watch. But along the way of investigating this, you'll see that the evidence will show that River Rouge is a small town. They don't have their own forensic and tech team and those types of scientists as many small cities in the state of Michigan do not. And many cities you'll learn will contact the Michigan State Police to provide that service. Michigan State Police calls them customers. Their customers are usually agencies or municipalities or cities. And they were called in to perform the services. They perform the services that are directed to be performed by the officer in charge, at least in this case. That's what the evidence will show. And they came in and they collected evidence, and they collected all this evidence, and out of all the evidence, that's what the evidence will show as it relates to Mr. Medina. But you also understand we didn't get, the evidence will show we didn't get the real story from Mr. Reese until he was compelled to do so. He was forced to do so when that evidence came through. But more importantly, you'll hear from the evidence from those scientists who told Mr. Arapakis, or officer in charge, Arapakis, to do certain things. And officer in charge will tell you, I did not. Did you do cell phone triangulation? I did not. Not to say that he was told to do that, but he did not. Did you go and get palm prints? Initially, did you get palm prints or toe prints from Bart or David? I did not. What you'll hear is that it was not until a very late time that he actually sought the DNA from Mr. Medina. But we have what we have. And again, that's what the evidence will show. What the evidence will show is that when we hold Mr. Makepeace to his proofs, when we hold him to what we have an understanding of what it means to be beyond a reasonable doubt, there is doubt when the last person around has not made a truthful statement. The last person to admit that they saw Ms. Ramstrom is not truthful. There is doubt when we have an officer in charge who does not do the things that his forensic scientists, those experts that he calls to do in and do certain work. There is doubt. And then you're going to hear from Dr. Lockman's son, who is the medical examiner in this. You're also going to hear that in that medical examiner's report that they had to do some additional work to correct or some corrective actions to that report. You'll also hear from an expert that we're going to call Dr. Dragovich. And Dr. Dragovich, and I want you to focus in on this because unless you have medical background or maybe you have a desire to research certain things, there's this thing called lividity. And I want you to focus in on this lividity. And you will hear how lividity becomes fixed. And we might know what some people might know from just casual watching of movies, something called rigor mortis, but lividity is a similar concept, but it is the pooling of blood in the body. And at a certain point in time, after that expiration of time, that becomes fixed, meaning that it stays in one place. You'll hear evidence that when the body was discovered, that it was in one place. And by the time we get to the autopsy, there's in additional places. So what does that tell you, what the evidence is telling you? It's telling you that we're not talking about the early morning hours of the 25th. We're talking about a closer period in time, closer to the 27th, closer to the time in which Mr. Medina is at work, closer in time, because by the time we see those other photographs, we're talking about the next day. We're talking about the 28th. And that's what the evidence will show. So I ask you to look at all of this evidence and, again, putting them to the test in this case and removing what could be obvious sympathy for the loss of life. And when you do that and you apply those principles and those standards, the evidence will show they are far and away. They are not at that 60 to 70%. This is not Comerica Park. This is not the Ambassador Bridge. This is a charge, an accusation that's been made against Mr. Medina, which they fall short significantly. And I'm asking you, as I'm asking you right now, at the close of proofs, I get one more chance to talk to you. Mr. Makepeace gets twice because it's his burden. I'm asking you now, as I'll ask you then, to find Mr. Medina not guilty. Thank you.